My brother pretended to support my engagement, but I noticed how oddly close he'd become to my fiancé. When I dug deeper, I discovered their shared secret, one they'd kept for years. Breaking my heart wasn't their goal. Destroying each other was. I simply uncovered the explosion. The first time I felt something was wrong, it wasn't subtle. It was glaring. At my own engagement party, surrounded by laughter, clinking glasses, and the glow of fairy lights, I caught sight of my brother leaning far too close to my fiancé. They weren't just talking. They were whispering, heads bent together, sharing a private joke that excluded me entirely. My fiancé laughed in a way I hadn't seen before, unguarded, almost conspiratorial. And when my brother's hand lingered on his shoulder a moment too long, a chill ran through me. I tried to shake it off. After all, this was supposed to be my night. I had just announced the happiest news of my life, and my family had gathered to celebrate. My brother raised his glass, smiling broadly, and said, "To my sister and her future husband, may they have a lifetime of happiness." Everyone clapped, and for a moment I wanted to believe his words. But the image of their closeness stayed with me, gnawing at the edges of my joy. As the weeks passed, the odd closeness became harder to ignore. I noticed the way they exchanged glances across the room, silent conversations carried in their eyes. At dinner, my fiancé would laugh at something my brother said before I even understood the joke, as if they shared a language I wasn't part of. Once I walked into the living room and found them sitting together, heads bent over a phone, grinning. They looked up quickly when I entered, too quickly, and the smile on my fiancé's face faltered. Small incidents began to pile up, each one unsettling. My fiancé mentioned details about my childhood, things I had never told him but my brother knew. "You used to hide in the attic when you were upset, didn't you?" he asked casually one evening. I froze. That was something only my brother had witnessed. Another time, I planned a quiet dinner with my fiancé at a small restaurant. When we arrived, my brother was already there, seated at a corner table, waving as if it were pure coincidence. "What are the odds?" he said cheerfully. But the odds felt too slim, too deliberate. I began to feel like an outsider in my own relationship. Conversations slipped into private territory, jokes excluded me, and plans seemed to bend around my brother's presence. My fiancé brushed it off when I asked. "He's just trying to be supportive," he said, smiling. "Isn't it nice that he cares?" But the warmth in his voice didn't soothe me, it unsettled me further. My parents, of course, saw nothing wrong. They praised the bond between my brother and fiancé, calling it rare and beautiful. My mother clasped my hand one afternoon and said, "You're lucky. Not everyone gets to have their brother and husband be so close." My father chuckled, adding, "It's like you're marrying into a family that already fits together." Their words stung. I wanted to scream that it wasn't beautiful, that it wasn't rare. It was suspicious. But every time I voiced my unease, they dismissed it as nerves. "You're just stressed," my mother said gently. "Engagements are overwhelming." The blindness of my family made me feel even more isolated. I was the only one who saw the cracks, the only one who felt the tension. Their praise of my brother's support only deepened my doubts. The seeds of suspicion grew stronger with each passing day. One evening, I walked into the kitchen and found them mid-conversation. My fiancé's voice was low, urgent, and my brother's expression was serious. They stopped abruptly when they saw me, exchanging a glance before my fiancé forced a smile. "We were just talking about the wedding plans," he said quickly. But the tone of his voice didn't match the words. Another time I overheard them in the hallway. My brother's voice was sharp, almost angry. "You can't keep doing this," he hissed. My fiancé replied in a hushed tone, "We don't have a choice." When I stepped closer, the conversation ended abruptly, both of them turning to me with forced smiles. That was the moment I knew. Their connection wasn't ordinary. It wasn't about support or friendship. Something was being hidden from me, something they had guarded carefully for years. My engagement had simply brought it to the surface. I decided then that I couldn't ignore it anymore. The joy I had felt when I announced my engagement had been tainted, overshadowed by doubt. My brother's smile no longer looked supportive. It looked calculated. My fiancé's laughter no longer sounded genuine. It sounded rehearsed. Suspicion had become a shadow that followed me everywhere, whispering that the bond between them wasn't what it seemed. And though I didn't yet know the truth, I knew one thing with certainty. I had to dig deeper. I couldn't ignore the tension anymore. The glances, the whispers, the sudden silences when I entered a room, they weren't coincidences. That night, after overhearing their hushed argument in the hallway, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. If they were hiding something, I had to find out what. The investigation began quietly. I didn't announce my suspicions. I knew if I did, they would only bury the truth deeper. Instead, I started observing. I noticed how my fiancé's phone lit up with messages at odd hours, and how he quickly turned it face down when I walked by. My brother, too, seemed to vanish at predictable times, always with vague excuses. I began keeping track, writing down when they disappeared, when they spoke in private, when their stories didn't align. One afternoon, while my fiancé was in the shower, I glanced at his phone left on the counter. The screen was unlocked and a thread of messages caught my eye. They weren't romantic, but they were intense. Arguments, accusations, reminders of past events I didn't understand. "You still owe me," one message from my brother read. Another from my fiancé replied, "You ruined everything back then. Don't pretend you didn't." My stomach twisted. This wasn't about me. It was about something that had existed long before I entered the picture. The more I dug, the clearer the hints became. Old photos tucked away in my brother's drawer showed him and my fiancé together years earlier, not as friends but as rivals. Their expressions were tense, their closeness strained. I found a letter too, folded and worn, with words that made my heart pound. "If you ever cross me again, I'll make sure you regret it." The shocking discovery hit me like a storm. They weren't allies. They weren't secretly united against me. They were enemies bound by a history of betrayal. My engagement had simply forced them back into each other's orbit, reigniting a fire that had never truly burned out. I confronted them the next evening. My voice shook, but I didn't hold back. "What's going on between you two?" I demanded, standing in the living room with the letter in my hand. "I know this isn't about me. It's about something you've been hiding." My fiancé's face paled. My brother's jaw tightened. "You don't understand," my fiancé said quickly, his tone defensive. "It's complicated." "Make me understand," I snapped. "Because right now it looks like you've both been lying to me." My brother scoffed, crossing his arms. "She doesn't need to know," he muttered. "Yes, I do," I shot back. "I'm marrying him. And you my brother. If you've been keeping secrets, I deserve the truth." Their denial crumbled under pressure. My fiancé admitted they had once been business partners years before I met him. My brother had betrayed him, stealing an opportunity that cost him dearly. My fiancé had never forgiven him. My brother, in turn, claimed my fiancé had sabotaged him in retaliation, leaving both of them scarred. The cracks in their stories revealed more than they intended. Each blamed the other, their voices rising, their anger spilling into the room. I stood between them, my heart pounding, realizing I wasn't the center of their conflict. I was the collateral. Their bond unraveled quickly after that. What had once looked like closeness was exposed as manipulation. My brother tried to assert dominance, reminding my fiancé of debts and past failures. My fiancé retaliated, throwing accusations like daggers, determined to prove he had been wronged more deeply. They stopped pretending to be allies. Instead, they became open adversaries, each trying to outdo the other, using me as leverage in their war. I saw it in the way they spoke. My brother would say, "She deserves better than you," his tone sharp, meant to wound. My fiancé would counter, "At least I didn't betray her trust like you did," his words dripping with venom. I was no longer their sister or fiancé. I was the weapon they wielded against each other. The explosion was brewing and I could feel it in every interaction. Family dinners turned into battlegrounds. My parents, still blind to the truth, praised their bond, unaware of the hostility simmering beneath the surface. I sat in silence, watching as their rivalry grew louder, their arguments sharper. One night, I walked into the kitchen to find them nose to nose, voices raised. "You'll never win," my brother hissed. My fiancé's reply was cold, steady. "I already have." They didn't notice me at first, but when they did, the room fell silent. Their eyes met mine, and for the first time I saw it clearly. Their goal wasn't breaking my heart. It was destroying each other. The realization was devastating. All the suspicion, all the unease, it wasn't about me being paranoid. It was about me being caught in the middle of a war that had started long before I arrived. My engagement had simply lit the fuse. I stood there, trembling as they glared at each other. "Enough," I whispered, my voice barely audible. But they didn't hear me. They were too consumed by their hatred, too determined to win. And in that moment I understood. I hadn't uncovered a betrayal of love. I had uncovered a battlefield. The silence after their last argument was deafening. I stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, my heart pounding, their words still echoing in my ears. They hadn't even noticed me at first, too consumed by their hatred. But once they did, the room fell into a tense quiet, the kind that carries more weight than shouting ever could. I knew then that the truth couldn't stay hidden any longer. The public fallout came faster than I expected. Within days, whispers spread beyond the walls of our home. Family gatherings turned into interrogations, friends asked uneasy questions, and the community buzzed with rumors. It wasn't me who revealed their secret, it was them. Their hostility spilled into places they couldn't control. At a family dinner, my brother snapped at my fiancé, accusing him of betrayal in front of everyone. My fiancé retaliated, his voice sharp, exposing details of their past partnership and the bitterness that had festered for years. Gasps filled the room. My parents sat stunned, forks frozen mid-air, while relatives exchanged shocked glances. The news traveled quickly. Neighbors who once admired my brother's loyalty began to whisper about his deceit. Friends who had trusted my fiancé now questioned his integrity. The shock spread like wildfire, leaving no corner untouched. I watched as the people who had once praised them now recoiled, their admiration replaced with disbelief. My brother's downfall was brutal. For years he had worn the mask of the supportive sibling, the loyal son, the dependable friend. That mask shattered in an instant. His reputation crumbled as stories of his betrayal surfaced. People remembered the times he had manipulated situations, the subtle ways he had twisted narratives to his advantage. What once seemed like charm now looked like cunning. Invitations stopped arriving, phone calls went unanswered, and the respect he had thrived on evaporated. I saw the change in him. He walked through town with his shoulders hunched, avoiding eye contact, his once confident stride replaced with hesitation. At family gatherings he sat in silence, no longer the center of attention. The pride in my parents' eyes had turned into disappointment, their voices heavy with regret. "We thought he was loyal," my father murmured one evening. "We didn't see the truth." My fiancé's exposure was just as devastating. His colleagues, once impressed by his professionalism, began to distance themselves. Friends who had celebrated our engagement now avoided him, unwilling to be associated with scandal. His image collapsed, leaving him isolated. I remember walking into a cafe where we used to meet friends, only to see him sitting alone, staring at his phone, the seat beside him empty. The man who had once seemed so confident now looked hollow, stripped of the admiration he had relied on. At home the tension was unbearable. My parents struggled to process the betrayal, their voices hushed, their expressions heavy. My mother confessed one night, "We defended them both. We thought you were imagining things. We were wrong." Her words carried sorrow, but also a quiet acknowledgement that I had been right all along. For me, vindication came slowly, wrapped in bittersweet moments. People who had doubted me began to apologize. Neighbors stopped me in the street, their voices soft with regret. "We should have listened," one said. "You saw what we didn't." Relatives admitted they had dismissed my concerns, calling me jealous or paranoid. Now they looked at me differently, with respect instead of pity. The feeling was bittersweet because vindication didn't erase the pain. It didn't undo the years of silence, the nights I spent questioning myself, wondering if I was imagining their closeness. But it gave me strength. It reminded me that persistence matters, that truth eventually surfaces, no matter how deeply it's buried. I reclaimed my dignity in small ways. Walking into a room and being greeted with respect. Hearing my own name spoken with admiration, not as a shadow but as someone who had endured and exposed the truth. Sitting at family dinners where my parents looked at me with new eyes, no longer comparing me to my brother but seeing me for who I was. Closure came not from revenge but from justice. Watching their downfall wasn't about satisfaction, it was about truth. They had built their lives on deception and now they were living in the ruins. I didn't need to hurt them further. The exposure had already done that. My strength came from reclaiming myself, from knowing I had survived betrayal and emerged stronger. Final reflection came in quiet moments, when I sat alone and thought about everything that had happened. Betrayal had changed me. It had taught me to trust my instincts even when the world refused to listen. It had shown me the danger of blind trust, the risk of admiring confidence without questioning what lies beneath. I thought about silence, about how it had been my shield for so long. People mistook it for weakness, but silence had given me strength. It had allowed me to observe, to endure, to wait for the right moment. And when the moment came, silence turned into a voice that carried truth. My brother's downfall was his own doing, my fiancé's exposure his own fault. But my survival was mine. I had endured suspicion, betrayal, and dismissal, and I had emerged stronger. The lesson was clear. Trust must be earned, resilience must be valued, and silence must never be underestimated. As I closed the chapter on their deception, I carried with me the knowledge that I was no longer invisible. I was no longer the quiet sister or the naive fiancé living in their shadow. I was myself, seen, heard, and stronger than ever.